You can go ahead, Roberto.
Thank you, everyone, for joining our monthly Ohio Legislative Children's Caucus webinar. We are so pleased today to be talking about both an important and a very timely topic, paid family and medical leave, and what that is, what it means for Ohio's families, but also for Ohio's businesses. And I'm thrilled to have a distinguished guest of panelists who are going to provide us with some background information and then also provide an opportunity for a wonderful discussion. Thanks to all of those of you who have joined us online and through the broadcast. Today, I am co-moderating and hosting with one of my Children's Caucus leaders here, one of our vice chairs, Representative Susan Manchester. We also have Senator Stephanie Kunze and Senator Vernon Sykes, who I don't believe are able to join us today. I don't see them yet, but they may hop on. And I know we have many of our colleagues on from both the House and the Senate. So just as by way of a little bit of background information, paid family medical leave strengthens women and families. It reduces gender and economic disparities. We know that it improves critical health outcomes, especially for women and parents and new babies. It positively impacts our local economies. It bolsters a stronger and more productive workforce. The need for this policy in the state of Ohio and across the country has never been punctuated more strongly than by the COVID-19 pandemic and its challenges to our caregiving systems, as we have aging family members, our families, our businesses, and the economy. Paid family and medical leave policy is being deliberated at the federal level. There's been a lot of discussion whether or not it will be included as part of the Build Back Better package that's being discussed in Congress. And if enacted successfully, the U.S. would take a profound step forward for children and families and no longer be just one of 6 countries, the only industrialized country worldwide without some form of permanent national paid leave policy. This is a key time for Ohio lawmakers to consider how paid family and medical leave in our own state could help further meet the needs of families and caregivers at a time when they need it most. So we're very thrilled to be having this discussion today. Today we have 3 panelists with us, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce them all, and then we will go through their presentations. We're going to start with Kate McLeese, who is the Senior Campaign Manager for Paid Leave for the United States. She is a political and community organizer who has developed and executed electoral issue advocacy and worker justice campaigns in the battleground state of Ohio for the AFL-CIO and the Ohio Environmental Council, and she is a proud Ohioan. We are also going to be hearing from Elizabeth Brown, who is the Executive Director of the Ohio Women's Public Policy Network. She's also a council member here in Columbus. Elizabeth is the Executive Director of the Women's Public Policy Network. She has a background in policymaking, economic development, and nonprofit service. She previously worked in Columbus's Department of Development on candidate and issue campaigns and was previously an aide in the Ohio House of Representatives and was a City Year AmeriCorps member. She is currently serving on Columbus City Council, where her legislative priorities have focused on strengthening women and families, including passing a first of its kind paid family leave policy in the city of Columbus. And then finally, we're going to hear from Heather Whaling, who is the founder and president of Gibbon Communication. This is a communications firm recognized as one of the best agencies in the country by Forbes magazine. In 2016, Heather was named Entrepreneur of the Year in the Ohio Valley region, which includes Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. And in 2019, she was included among the inaugural Future 15 class, a collection of innovators committed to making Columbus a world-class community. After launching Gibbon in 2009, Heather's data-driven approach to communication has helped the firm evolve into one of the top boutique firms in the Midwest. And she services clients across a range of industries. And she has been a vocal advocate for issues impacting women and girls, specifically economic self-sufficiency and paid family leave. And she serves on multiple local boards and commissions. So I'm very pleased to have all three of these panelists today to be talking about this issue and walking us through many of the components of family and medical leave. So we're going to start with Kate McLeese first.
All right, thank you, Rep. Russo, and hello to everyone. Thanks for being here. I am very excited to talk with you today about where we are in the federal landscape with paid leave, what impact paid family and medical leave or lack of action on paid leave would have on our families, our workforce, and the economy, and most importantly, what you can do about it here at the state level. Paid family and medical leave has been on a roller coaster inside the roller coaster that the broader Build Back legislation has been on. If Build Back Better is passed, it will end up being between a $1.5 and a $3.5 trillion investment for families all throughout the US that could include paid leave, childcare, climate action, healthcare, home care, universal pre-K, affordable housing, immigration reform, lower drug costs, and more. Paid leave is the one item in the Build Back Better agenda that can directly touch people's lives across age, region, community type, family structure, party, ideology, or life stage. And yet we're seeing some risk that paid leave could fall out of the package. So I hope that what we share with you today will demonstrate that leaving paid leave out of the federal Build Back Better package would be a mistake, and provide you with a foundation of why and how Ohio needs to take state action on paid family and medical leave to build on whatever ends up happening at the federal level. So to level set and make sure we're all working from the same vocabulary, when we talk about paid family and medical leave, we're talking about three types of leave. The first is parental leave for all types of parents: moms, dads, foster, and adoptive parents. One of the most horrible stats when we talk about paid family leave is that 1 in 4 moms go back to work within 10 days after having a baby. That is just unacceptable. And most dads don't have a single day of paid leave. The second type of leave is personal medical leave. So this would be if you have something happen to you that's a longer term health issue, that you have paid job protected time off work to handle your medical issue and have a job to come back to without losing any income. Nearly 1 in 4 workers in Ohio are over the age of 55. And we know that older workers are more likely to experience serious medical conditions. Combined with that, and the number one reason that people file personal bankruptcy is because of too many medical bills. Just think about the difference that access to paid leave would have on people undergoing cancer treatments or who are forced to leave their job just to have a necessary surgery. Paid leave ties you to the workforce and to your health insurance. The third type of leave is caregiving leave. So the reality is that caregiving most often falls on women. In Ohio, 84% of Black mothers, 51% of white mothers, 57% of Latina mothers, and 34% of AAPI mothers are the number one family breadwinner. And in Ohio, we see an 11 percentage point gap in labor force participation between men and women, in large part because the United States lacks family-friendly policies like paid leave. The bottom line is that paid leave means people, especially women, are not forced to leave the labor force to care for their families or their own health, which reduces turnover for employers of all sizes, and it boosts the economy. At the beginning of this year, it truly felt like we were going to get a big win with paid family and medical leave and be a real reality in the US. And as Representative Russo pointed out, the US is the only industrialized nation in the world without such a policy. At the beginning of this pandemic, only 25% of workers had access to any amount of paid leave. And it was way worse for low-wage workers who are disproportionately people of color. Only 8% of low-wage workers had any type of paid leave. In Ohio, even unpaid leave under the Family and Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, is unavailable to a whopping 61% of working people. At the end of 2020, Ohio's labor force had lost 3,000 workers, and more than 4 times as many women were unemployed compared to 1 year earlier. If nothing is done, women nationwide will lose $64.5 billion in wages each year from their reduced labor participation, with lower work hours or just dropping out of the workforce completely. And if we do pass paid leave, we could actually benefit nationwide. Our economy could add more than $500 billion in additional economic activity each year. President Biden really took all of these different factors into account and ran on a pretty comprehensive paid leave policy that the White House, as well as as Congress, particularly the House Ways and Means Committee, really took and ran with it. I'll let Liz get a little more into the specifics of some of the evidence-based approaches to a paid leave policy to make sure we achieve equity. But some of the key provisions were 12 weeks of leave, all types of leave for all types of workers, progressive wage replacement, a broad and inclusive definition of family, and a permanent program. Until about 3 weeks ago, 12 weeks of comprehensive paid leave seemed very, very achievable. Then some political deal making was made, and all of a sudden paid leave was cut to 4 weeks and then cut out completely. The public outcry was loud and immediate, demonstrating just how popular paid leave has become to people all throughout the U.S. Paid leave champions with Speaker Pelosi, Senator Gillibrand, and Senator Murray leading the way helped ensure that 4 weeks of permanent paid comprehensive leave is back in the House version that is hopefully set to be passed this week. If it passes, it goes to the Senate, where all 50 Democratic votes are required. And Senator Manchin of West Virginia is the #1 person right now who needs to be persuaded. 4 weeks may feel disappointing, and in many ways it is. But if we can pass a paid leave policy that has a progressive wage replacement, so the lowest wage workers are getting the largest benefit, a policy that includes all workers, whether you're a gig worker or an independent contractor, all types of leave with a broad definition of family, and it's all passed as a permanent program. This would be a huge win for working families throughout the U.S. Passing 4 weeks of a comprehensive and permanent policy also lays the groundwork for increasing weeks. And most notable for everyone on this call, it provides a framework from which states like ours can really build on and grow. The more we're able to add on, the bigger the impact for families, and the more competitive we can make Ohio for businesses who really have grown to understand the benefit of a public policy. So I'll just wrap up my portion of the panel with 2 action items for all of you. #1 is contact Senator Brown and tell him Ohio needs paid leave, and we want him to fight and keep it in the Build Back Better Act. You all have influence on this call, and with the fight really going to the Senate, Senator Brown can play a really key role in making sure he knows that Ohioans want paid leave. The second thing is get creative with ways to build on a federal program that focuses on equity for individuals, economic recovery for families, and can demonstrate a competitive edge for companies to do business here in the Buckeye State. And I want to give a special shout out to Representative Boyd and Representative Russo, who have really been leaders in the state for working on a state paid family and medical leave policy. So I really look forward to answering any questions you may have during the discussion time, and I will turn it back to Representative Russo.
Okay, thank you so much, Kate, for that information. Next, we are going to hear from Liz Brown.
Hi, thank you so much, Representative Russo, and thank you, Kate, for helping to lay the groundwork. And I'm going to go into, frankly, a little bit of the information I have is repetitive of Kate's presentation, but you really can't hear the information about paid leave too many times because it is so critical to our economy and to families. So I really want to start right there. You can advance to the next slide, Allison. I'm going to talk about why paid leave matters for our economy here in Ohio and for our families. And the two are obviously intertwined. You really can't have a strong economy without having stable families. And I know that those of you in the Children's Caucus understand that, and I believe that's part of your interest in children, not just for the good of outcomes for our youngest people, but because it's good for all of us, right? Good for our economy overall. So particularly in looking at Ohio's economy, evidence from other state-based systems, because we would not be the first if we were to enact a state-based system. We would not be the first. And evidence from others, California has had theirs for, I think, close to 15 years at this point. They're the longest standing program. But that evidence demonstrates that access to paid family and medical leave promotes economic stability and workforce participation for parents and caregivers. So thinking about an equitable policy, the reason we say parents and caregivers is because paid family and medical leave is not just for when parents have a baby. It is for caregiving needs over a lifetime. And that's why parents and caregivers have stressors to their caregiving needs at home throughout their work life, and that has a ripple effect on their employers. So a strong state-based system promotes that economic stability and workforce participation, and improves retention and reduces turnover for employers. When looking at evidence in other states, researchers have talked to employers to understand their view of these programs. And you're going to hear more about that from Heather. But it is an important tool. Paid family and medical leave is an important tool for employers. As Kate said, women make up nearly half of Ohio's labor force, and also more than 1/4 of its business owners. So women are 1/4 of our business owners, which means they're, as you're going to hear from Heather, oftentimes the ones leading these organizations having to make these tough decisions when there is not a state or federal system to back up what they know their employees need. So all of this goes to show that access to paid leave improves families' overall stability and financial security. As I said, that absolutely redounds to positive outcomes in our economy. We can go to the next slide and talk about that family stability. So looking sort of broadly at the numbers here, more than 134,000 children are born in our state every year. And in 72% of all Ohio households with children, so that's nearly 1.8 million homes, all parents have paying jobs. So think about again, the economic impact of caregiving. People, employees aren't computers that boot up right when they get to their job and then power off at the end of the day. They have responsibilities 24 hours round the clock, and their family life and their ability to provide for their family affects what they can do on the clock. In the next 20 years, the share of the state's population aged 65 and older will grow by 1/7. Older workers are more likely to experience serious medical conditions that require care. And that's, again, why a real comprehensive, equitable paid family leave policy is important, because not only do we have to support parents who provide care for their children, but also for older workers who experience those medical conditions, and then the immediate family members who really are on the hook to provide that care. Not just on the hook, want to provide that care, right? There's a phenomenon that we're all familiar with, right? Working mother, right? America's working mothers and the bind that creates. Well, there was a really powerful headline in The Atlantic that I read years ago called "The Crisis of America's Working Daughters." And we need to keep our eye on how workers in our economy are not just responsible for providing care for their children, but also their parents, their spouses, their siblings, as our economy ages, frankly. And women's wages support their household. So it is particularly bad sort of macroeconomic factor when women's wages go down because they need to provide that caregiving support. So in Ohio, 55% of mothers are key family breadwinners. You take that income out of the family, and the economy feels that. The family feels it, and the economy does too. And then I want to point out that across the country, many men want to play a larger role in caring for their families, but unsupportive policies and stigma at work hold them back. So the more that we dig into comprehensive paid family leave solutions, really the better we're doing for women and for men across our country. So the need for state action is clear with everything I went through in terms of good for families, good for the economy. And Kate mentioned sort of the dismal rates of access to paid leave. I want to drill down too on a number she gave about the inaccessibility of FMLA, of unpaid leave. In Ohio, even unpaid leave is inaccessible for 61% of working people. Think about that. You don't even have this security to take unpaid leave for your job in order to meet these really critical family leaves or family needs. And that is because of the way FMLA is set up. It was a good policy when it was passed in 1994, 95, something around there, in the 90s, mid 90s. Good policy, but for a different economy. You know, it was built around this idea that employers are large. So there were, thresholds for number of employees that a company must have in order to be required to offer this, job protection, essentially. We've moved past that as an economy. And then additionally, because it's unpaid leave, really entire sections of the economy can't even dream of taking it because they simply can't afford to miss a week of a paycheck. So action at the state level is absolutely needed in order to right-size these factors in our economy. We'll move to the next slide. So I want to also call out Representative Boyd for championing paid leave really since she came to the legislature. The first bill that was introduced for paid family leave for Ohio was led by Representative Christy Coons and then by Representative Janine Boyd. And Representative Boyd and Boggs carried another bill. And then Representative Boyd, I know, is working with Representative Russo to do the same. So thank you for that. And you can move to the next slide. I will go through what we really need to see in terms of, evidence-based principles that will kind of bring Ohio's model of paid family leave closer to what this economy needs, not simply providing pay for this existing FMLA structure. So comprehensive coverage, parental, caregiving, personal medical, covering all employees, regardless of the size of the employer, or the classification of the worker. As Kate said, contract employees, gig economy workers are critical to be included. And then providing adequate wage replacement for all leave circumstances. So that no matter where you are on the income spectrum, you are getting a wage replacement that actually affords you the choice of whether to take this policy or not. The policy must adopt an inclusive definition of an individual who is covered by caregiving leave and provide adequate leave time of at least 12 weeks. It also has to guarantee job protection, anti-retaliation, and anti-discrimination. That's just a key component that makes sure this benefit actually reaches the workers that we intend at passage. So the program structure on the next slide, state level bills are modeled as sort of social insurance funded by employees through premiums deducted from employee wages. So this model that has been introduced, under this model, businesses don't bear the financial costs of funding the program. And employers currently offering paid leave policies that are employer funded or a combination of employer and employee funded would be able to alleviate the financial costs of providing that policy themselves. Another note on the state level program structure on the next slide is in the bill, an actuarial evaluation will determine the exact premium costs and administrative and technology costs of developing and operating this program. But in general, previous Ohio bills were based off of a Colorado example, which estimates the total cost to an employee would be about $25 to $30 a year, and estimates that the cost of running the actuarial evaluation and establishing the program would be just about $400,000. There are huge cost savings over the long term for our state and for our businesses, and huge gains for our economy in doing this. So the Labor Department put out a report about 6 or 8 years ago now, titled the cost of doing nothing, which really went into what, and I will link that in the chat in a minute, but that really went into not the costs of a paid leave program, but really the costs of the status quo, because our economy will only gain the more that we allow all workers to compete and all workers to participate. And I'll really end on that note on my last slide here, that the time is now, and we have an opportunity to build off the momentum from national efforts where workers and business owners have expressed support for paid family leave. We can deliver on that in Ohio too, pass a program that's complementary of what we hope passes at the federal level. Recognizing that if we don't act now, we have a lot to lose. Coming off of the COVID-19 crisis, it is a really important tool to help Ohio's economy rebuild if we give workers every chance we can to fully participate in the workforce, and help companies alleviate their labor shortage, and also make sure that workers are recognized as full people, often holding up their families, and that they cannot work for our economy without, us leaders in government working for them too. So with that, I really appreciate time on the agenda today, and I'm super excited to turn things over to Heather Whaling, who understands this issue deeply from a business perspective.
Thank you, Liz.
So much, Liz, for that. And I too am excited to hear from Heather, especially given just the business and the small business perspective. I originally had interest in this topic, not only because I've been fortunate to be able to take advantage of paid family medical leave with the birth of 3 children, but also went through the experience with my own small business when we decided to offer this program for our employees, figuring out what were options and what were the costs associated with that, and realizing the importance of being able to tap into a state program if it existed, and the potential cost savings to small businesses. So I'm so glad. I know, Heather, you have delved into this over the years and have been such a big advocate and spokesperson for this from a business perspective. So glad to have you talking to our members today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. So my name is Heather. I am the founder of Gebben Communication. Gebben is a public relations and social media digital marketing agency based here in Columbus. And just for context, we have just over 30 employees. I appreciate you inviting me to share my experience and perspective on paid family leave, particularly that you do want to hear from a small business owner as part of this conversation. I want to start by sharing my personal experience with maternity leave, which helped crystallize why this is so important, and then share a little bit also about my experience as a business owner providing paid leave. In 2013, I was pregnant and went into labor 5 weeks before my due date on a rural highway with no warning. Suddenly, my contractions were just 2 minutes apart. We were in Lodi. We drove to the nearest hospital where a sign said horse and buggies this way and horse and buggies this way and cars this way. This little rural hospital, they just didn't have the expertise, the equipment to deliver my son who was in breech. So we were then life-flighted to Akron, where I had an emergency C-section, and my son Evan was moved into the NICU, where he spent the first 13 days of his life. So for nearly 2 weeks, I was singularly focused on doing whatever I could do to get him healthy and home. And during that time, I never had to wonder if I would have a job to go back to or if I would get paid for this time away from work. That's because 4 years earlier, I had started Gabbin Communication. I was the boss. So of course I'd have a job to go back to. And of course I would get paid. But as we've heard today, that's a luxury that is just not available to most Ohioans. That's why in April of 2016, I introduced Gabbin Loves Families, which is our version of a paid parental leave policy. I self-fund 10 weeks of paid leave, plus a 2-week transition period for all new moms and new dads, whether they give birth or adopt, at 100% of their salary. Since then, we've had 15 new parents, moms and dads, take leave, and 2 more, at least that we know of, who will be taking leave next year. I do want to call out that the dad piece of this conversation is critical, I think, for us to move past gender norms that say mom is the primary caregiver and dad's career is more important. It's just not the reality for Ohio families. I think Kate had just put some stats in the chat about that. And the mommy tax is creating economic imbalances that are bad for women and then bad for the state's economy overall. I was surprised to learn that the wage gap between mothers and childless women under the age of 35 is actually now greater than the wage gap between young men and between men and women. 30-year-old American women without children earn 90% of men's wages, while mothers of the same age and education are making only 70%. We talk a lot about the gender wage gap, but I think it's also important to talk about that gap between women with kids and those without kids. One way that we can help close that gap is by normalizing dads as caregivers. That shifts perceptions that then lead to that mommy tax. Working mothers are significant economic drivers here in Ohio, which is why we need policies that support that gender equity. Other small businesses like me are trying to figure out how to make paid leave available to our employees. As a small business, I get asked all the time, how do we manage the workload? How did we figure out the dollars and cents? And I always tell people that it requires careful planning, but it's doable. But I think the reality is that that's just not the full story. So I think first we have to acknowledge that my business is a professional services firm, and we're fortunate to be in growth mode. So that means we have very strong profit margins, which allow me to be able to self-fund that benefit for my employees. Other businesses with tighter margins or slower growth, or that are still trying to climb out of the COVID hole, have far less financial flexibility, which means they can't offer paid leave even if they wanted to. The bigger issue, though, I think from a business standpoint, is how self-funding this benefit potentially reduces my ability to invest in other parts of the business. So Gabbin is in growth mode, and I think this is an important piece of this conversation. So we billed more in October than any other month in our 12-year history. I made our first acquisition in May, which has helped contribute to this growth. We're on pace to increase year-over-year billings by more than 40%, which is massive growth, particularly as we're still navigating a pandemic. But I find myself every week spending hours and hours on talent-related issues. How fast can we hire? We even got to the point where we basically said no to all new business in September and most of October because I couldn't hire fast enough. Part of that is due to the high cost of bringing on a new employee and the benefits that go with that. We continue to pay 75% of our employees' health insurance because they think it's the right thing to do. And we're seriously considering expanding our paid leave, again, because I think it's the right thing to do. But then as a result, I find myself being a bit more conservative than I would like with hiring decisions. There, in reality, was enough work to create at least another 3 or 4 more jobs this year, just in my company. But I know that I have to watch my budget because we're self-funding leave for at least 4 to 5 employees a year over the past few years. That's literally thousands and thousands of dollars that I am spending on this benefit that I would much rather be able to budget for new hires. But because the absence of a funded statewide or federal leave plan basically means I cannot be as aggressive with hiring as I would like. So the sort of bottom line for me, the lack of a statewide or federal funded plan, funded leave policy is creating a prohibitive burden, a financial burden for business owners. But at the same time, the reality is we have to self-fund this leave. At least for us, it's the only way we have hopes of competing for top talent. The reality is the federal, the 4 weeks that are being considered right now, it's not enough to level the playing field for small businesses. So there's a gap that needs to be filled. And I hope that maybe that's where the state could step in. Paid leave is too important to just be a fancy perk in talent wars. And the drawback from a business standpoint is multiple. There are so many benefits that come from paid leave for a business. So it improves worker retention, which is saving businesses like mine money through reduced turnover cost. Turnover costs are estimated to be about 1/5 of an employee's annual salary. So if you all of a sudden have high turnover numbers, that is taking a large chunk of revenue out of the picture. Research also shows that when workers don't have access to paid leave, they are more likely to need to leave their jobs. New mothers who take paid leave are more likely than mothers who do not take any leave to be working again 9 to 12 months after childbirth. There's ample research that makes the case for why paid leave is in business best interest. I think sometimes we'll hear lobbyists or research groups say that employees oppose a permanent paid leave policy because it's too expensive. It's just not true. Liz mentioned the California program, and they have research after they implemented their statewide funded program in 2004, 87% of businesses that used that program reported no increase in operational costs. The reality is that 7 in 10 small business owners support paid family leave. Small businesses like mine can't necessarily afford fancy influential lobbyists, but we do know that paid leave as a program is not prohibitive. The lack of a funded policy is what makes it prohibitive. So as a small business owner, I'm encouraged that you're having this conversation, and I hope that there will be more action that comes with it. Paid leave is good for families and good for businesses. Here in Ohio, we like to talk about how we're a state that values families. And if family truly is the backbone of our state, then we need policies that reflect that belief. Words and actions right now are not aligned. The lack of paid leave policy in Ohio is sending an anti-family, anti-business message. Paid family and medical leave is life-changing for families who have access to it and can be game-changing for businesses that are based here in Ohio. That was everything that I had wanted to say. I'm happy to answer questions, but thank you for the chance to allow me to share my experiences as you continue to explore policies that will help support Ohio families and Ohio businesses.
Well, thank you so much, Heather, and thank you to all of the panelists for sharing all that information with us. Are there any questions here? I don't see any in the chat. Oh, maybe we do have a couple now. Please feel free to put questions in the chat or raise your hand if you do have a question for any of our panelists. We're a quiet crew today. I believe all the representatives have the ability to unmute themselves as well. So if there are any fellow lawmakers on the line that would like to ask a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask.
So there's a question in chat. This is Senator Hackett. Where is the chamber, and then where is NFIB on this issue? Did you hear me, Susan?
Yes, I did. Do any of our panelists have an answer or would like to weigh in on that? I personally, I don't have that in front of me right now, but if anyone would like to jump in on that.
Well, I see it as it was a question on the chat, and I just was curious to see what it was, what the answer would be.
Yeah, I can jump in and give a little context here. We've seen different reactions from different chambers of commerce throughout the U.S. generally. We see more support coming from local chambers of commerce as they're hearing from their members on the impact, like what Heather described, and how it could be how it could help small businesses in particular. So, and I see there's a question. This is Kate McLeese with Plus Paid Leave for the U.S. Sharing the response here, and so there's been more engagement from the local level of Chamber of Commerce's than we've seen from like the state or the national chamber.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kate. Any other questions? One question I might have, oftentimes at the state level, we look at what other states have done. And so I was curious to know what other states have passed a state-sponsored paid family leave policy, and perhaps what are some of the better examples of a state-funded policy that we should examine moving forward?
I can take that, and then others can join in if you have more to add. This is Elizabeth Brown with the Women's Public Policy Network. So some of the key states who have passed, again, California's is the longest standing program, and it has been in place since 2004. New Jersey, Rhode Island, New York, those states have all passed programs and are fully implemented. And then there's sort of another bucket of states who have more recently passed programs, and they're really on that early end of implementation. So that's Washington State, District of Columbia, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Oregon. And in those states, there are, California's is one of the older ones. And I would say New York's paid family leave program is one of the more comprehensive ones. So really inclusive of paid family medical leave, which is not just for, not just parental leave for newborns, but making sure that you can take time off to care for a sick or aging loved one as well. And I think that component is particularly important for Ohio, based on some of those statistics that I gave earlier about our workforce, right? Our economy. In the next 20 years, the share of the state's population age 65 and older will grow by 1/7. So older workers are more likely to experience those serious medical conditions themselves that require care. And then as they age, they will be more likely to need care from others in the workforce, right? Whether it's a spouse or child, an adult child, to help provide for them. So I think that's something that Ohio really needs to take into account. So those are some of the states that have passed the program, and they're underway there. I linked a little earlier in the chat a link to a document by the National Partnership for Women and Families that particularly goes through employer attitudes in those states. They surveyed to really and researched to really understand not just what residents of the state felt having accessed the program, but how employers adapted to the program. So for example, the majority of California employers reported a positive effect on employee productivity and on their own profitability and performance. And those who didn't report a positive effect reported a neutral effect. Pivoting to New York, just 1 year after implementation, again, California is older, so they have more data, but just 1 year after implementation, 97% of employers were in compliance with the new law and reporting positive outcomes. Early, obviously, but going well in terms of employers. And I think that goes back to a lot of what Heather's presentation revolved around. Some employers have the ability to retain employees by having strong benefits packages like this, and others are totally reliant on whether, states or the federal government can really come up with something that allows them to offer that benefit to their employees.
I think one other thing worth noting with the states that have passed public policies, each state that has taken this issue on has passed an even better version of paid leave. It's gotten progressively better as states have taken on this issue. And most recently, I don't think you mentioned this, Liz, but correct me if I'm wrong, but Colorado also just passed a paid family and medical leave policy. And this was the first time it was on the ballot for voters to vote on, and it passed overwhelmingly in the state with the most progressive policy that's in the most comprehensive policy that's in the country right now.
Thank you for that. Are there any additional questions? I did see we had one in the chat saying it's separate from immediate family leave, but can you talk about the impact of federal child tax credit changes? I know there was an article also shared in the chat about that, but if any of you have comments on that and how this perhaps plays into paid leave, that'd be great to hear.
That's a great question. The child tax credit is, it has definitely been really important for families as it's begun to roll out this year. And pivoting back to some of what Kate was talking about with the Build Back Better plan, I mean, the way we look at it from the Women's Public Policy Network is there are a lot of really key issues in Build Back Better that relate directly to families and kind of helping stabilize families, which we've all been pretty destabilized over these last 18 months. And so it's responsive for that reason, but it also helps to set a tone for a more stable future for families for a generation. And the child tax credit is an integral part of that. It is not directly related to paid family leave. In terms of, the policy levers aren't linked in any way. And it also, the child tax credit, specifically is for families with dependent children. Paid family leave, again, as Kate said in her presentation, it really affects every American, every Ohioan, no matter what stage of your life you're in, no matter what stage of caregiving you're in, yourself or a loved one, very likely, almost certainly will have an event that requires paid family and medical leave at some point over your working life. And that's why it is such a common sense issue.
Thank you. We do have a question that is in the Q&A. Can you touch on the processes by which other states have passed this type of legislation? It seems like there would be significant bipartisan support, but I'm wondering what barriers or misconceptions is holding Ohio and other states back.
Unfortunately, I wish I could tell you more about the barriers that other states have passed. I don't know if Kate has something to chime in there, but I do know that here in Ohio, we were able to get a committee hearing on the paid family leave bill. Representatives Boyd and Boggs were able to do that last GA. And so I know that there were a bipartisan group of people who came and supported it, proponent testimony in that process. And you all are the experts on the legislature and not I, so I don't want to speak to what I think some of the roadblocks might be, but I do believe that as we see more states pass versions of this that work, there is only mounting evidence that the Ohio legislature can pass something that works for Ohio too.
And I'll add that I think as we've gone through this pandemic in particular, we have really seen businesses come out of the woodwork in their support for a public policy. During the initial months of the pandemic, one of the emergency pieces of legislation was a temporary paid leave provision that was directly tied to reasons people had to be out of the workforce for pandemic related reasons. And so employers had a chance to see how public policy would work for them. And there was overwhelming success in how and positive feedback in how that program worked. So I think we've seen that develop throughout the pandemic in ways we haven't really experienced before. And that just opens the doors to a much broader coalition, I think, and more partnerships in working to find a solution that makes sense for Ohio. I linked earlier in the chat a report that PLUS, my organization, did on paid leave in the pandemic, and what businesses had to say about having public policy for paid leave. And then we also have there's another link in the chat on the growing support from businesses calling on public policy that are good resources, I think, for thinking about some different partners and especially in the business community to work with on this issue.
I will also just point out that the Children's Caucus moderator here just linked to a Build Back Better, to a New America poll about paid family leave and some new data on that, and that 73% of adults in the US say they support paid family leave. So this is a broadly popular issue. Obviously, it has bipartisan support just based on those numbers. If 73% of adults are in favor, then it's bipartisan. And it is really the most popular piece of some of the central tenets of Build Back Better. When you look at those numbers, 73% of adults in the US say they support funding paid family leave.
And one more bipartisan example of paid leave that we've seen during this pandemic was federal employees there was legislation passed for federal employees to get paid family leave. That was under the Trump administration, and it was passed with bipartisan votes in Congress. So that was another example. And the federal government is one of the largest employers in the country. So just a really great example and how life-changing that was for federal employees throughout the U.S.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? I think we've got some good information flowing in the chat here with links to different surveys and articles. So feel free to check those out at some point. Any further questions from the audience for our panelists? All right. Well, I very much appreciate all three of you being with us today. You provided some really excellent insight and information on this issue, and just appreciate having the perspective from all three of you. Thank you to everyone for joining us today on this important topic, and we look forward to seeing you all again next month.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.